Chapter 10. I feel more secure about keeping the documents at home with this new room you've designed, Jack. Senator John Carver shook his hand. Now we just need to figure out where those stolen documents went to. I really hope you find those papers soon, John, and the person who stole them. Senator Carver told Jack privately that the stolen documents were related to suspicious behavior of Senator Ivan Wolfe. It seemed that Senator Wolfe's actions and words of his campaign didn't seem to match up. Ivan Wolfe was the oldest of the two Wolfe brothers who served on Paradise Lake's town council. Jack hoped the brothers weren't dishonest in all their dealings, but it was starting to look like his hopes were about to be dashed. Any lack of integrity by politicians who were there to serve the people troubled Jack. Yeah, I hope to find those documents soon, too, but at least from now on, the documents in this room will be safe from prying eyes. The senator turned his head to stare at the completed secret room that Jack had just finished. The room was hidden behind a large bookshelf that spanned the length of their living room. Only the senator and his wife knew the access code. I'm really glad I could help, John. Have a great weekend. Jack grinned and hurried to his truck, driving home, happy to have helped another person feel a little safer in their everyday life. Each security design project he completed for someone made Jack feel like he was doing something right. The bankruptcy of his father's business and the ruin of their personal lives of their family when their dad's business partners stole their money spurred Jack on to continue doing what he could to help as many people as possible to feel safer. As he drove up the mountain towards home, Jack thought of his new wife. He'd barely seen Bella in the last 3 days. She'd been so busy finishing the Rose Adventure Park designs, and he had been busy completing the senator's secret room, that they were like ships passing in the night. Parking his truck in front of the house, Jack had an idea that would give both of them a much-needed break. He only hoped his wife would agree to it. He hurried into the house and found Mrs. Potter in the kitchen and told her of his plan. Well, I hope you can get your wife to leave your office long enough to eat, Jack. She's as thin as a rail. Too much stress, if you ask me. Mrs. Potter shook her head and wiped her hands on her apron. I'm going to try and get her to take a break, Mrs. Potter. Well, good luck with that. Mrs. Potter's concern for Bella made Jack aware of how much he had neglected his wife the past few days. Hurrying down the hallway, he reached Bella's office and knocked. He didn't hear anything, so he opened the door, only to see Bella glued to her computer screen. Hey there, Bella. Jack walked into the room, but she didn't seem to hear him. He walked behind the desk, put his head beside hers, and whispered in her ear. Wake up, my beauty. Startled, she jumped back in her chair. Jack, I didn't even hear you knock. I did knock, but you were concentrating so hard that you didn't hear me. Jack winked at her. I guess. I think I only have 1 more day's work, and I'll have this design finished and ready for you to take a look at it, so I should get back to work. Bella put her hands back on her keyboard. Jack leaned his hips on the edge of the desk beside her, staring at his beautiful wife. With her hair up in a scrunchie and a pencil stuck in the middle, she looked a little like a mixture between street urchin and serious student. Without warning, he grasped her hands, his gaze studying her intently. Surprised, she looked up at him, her eyes big and round as pink blossomed in her cheeks. Jack, what are you doing? This afternoon, I don't think you should go back to work. What? Why ever not? Because, my beautiful workaholic, you need a break, and I have a great idea that involves the 2 of us going into the great outdoors today. Jack, I really can't. I've got to get this done. Jack leaned closer until his forehead touched hers and whispered, Your boss insists. He kissed her forehead and leaned back, eyeing her critically. Mrs. Potter told me you've gotten much too thin, and I happen to agree. You need fresh air and lots of food. I think a picnic is in order. A picnic? Jack laughed as her eyes widened in confusion. He reached for Bella's hand, pulling her behind him. Yes, a picnic. I want to show you the silver mine, and then I want to take you to see some awe-inspiring scenery of the mountain and down to the lake. Bella followed him into the hallway and sighed. "All right, give me 10 minutes to change my clothes," she sighed, looking down at her rumpled sweatpants. "It's a beautiful day, Bella. Bring along some shorts and a t-shirt so you can enjoy the sun," Jack called after her as she went to her room to change. Jack was waiting for her at the large front entrance when she arrived 10 minutes later. She wore cut-off jean shorts and a blue t-shirt. Both were pieces of clothing that emphasized her curves. Jack realized too late that maybe it would have been wiser for him to suggest she wear baggy jeans and a sweatshirt. Brahms wagged his tail and slipped his head under Bella's hand, just asking to be petted. She reached down to hug him and slipped her outdoor running shoes on. They walked outside into the sunshine, and Jack put the picnic basket in the back of the 2-seater ATV. Brahms sat in between them as they followed the well-worn trail that led to Grand's mine. Bella held the large picnic basket while Jack drove. Brahms' tail wagged wildly as they drove through the large patch of trees. 30 minutes later, they reached a large clearing. "Oh, Jack, it's beautiful here." Bella stopped suddenly, her gaze spreading from the mountains around them to the green valley below. "I see you've hired workers for the silver mine." Bella's gaze shifted to the valley where many miners hurried in and out of the mine. As they drove toward the workers, Jack explained, "Since I've now inherited Grand's mine, I saw no reason to wait. I've always wanted to dig deeper and further back inside that mine." When they reached the silver mine, it was a beehive of activity. They jumped out of the ATV. Jack told Brahms to stay. Jack walked over to talk to his foreman, who was in charge of the workers. "Hey, Mike, got a few minutes to show us around?" Jack spoke to the foreman. He nodded and handed Jack and Bella each a hard hat. Jack turned to Bella and slipped a hard hat on her head and placed one on himself as well. "We'll follow Mike. It'll be easier as he knows where the workers are and how to navigate the inside of the mine to reach the different areas without getting hurt." They followed Jack's foreman into the cave. Loud sounds from the machinery and sometimes the loud conversations from the miners around them made it impossible to hear one another. It wasn't until they walked further inside that the noise quieted and they were able to have a conversation. "This is where it forks off into 3 separate tunnels," Mike pointed to the dark caverns up ahead. "It's easy to get lost, so you'll have to know which tunnel leads to where. We'll follow this one to the left, because it'll take us to the original site." Jack felt Bella's hand slip inside his. He squeezed her hand, knowing she didn't like dark, enclosed spaces. The light that was attached to their hard hats was what helped them finagle their way through the dark passage. After a long walk, they finally arrived. "This is the original site location from when Walker Stevenson bought the mine decades ago." Mike pointed to a section of tunnel just ahead. "I remember this spot." Jack walked farther ahead and ran one hand along the solid dirt-packed wall. "When I was 10 years old, Grand showed me a silver thread that ran down that part of the mine. At the time, Grand told me he didn't have the energy to hire the workers needed, but he said one day I would find the treasure that was here." Bella followed him, studying the solid wall of dirt. "I see a thin line of something gray and also a strain of something yellowish along this side. Does that mean there are minerals here to mine?" "It means there's a possibility of minerals. As soon as we get the team here, we'll dig deeper to see what we find." As Mike spoke, he also studied the wall opposite them, making marks along the wall. "We'll be starting to mine this area next week, so we'll keep you updated as to what we find." "How exciting," Bella said as they began the long walk back to the mine's entrance. Finally, they stepped out into the sunlight. "Thanks for the tour, Mike." "Anytime, Jack. I'll send you the first report at the end of next week." Mike took their hard hats and put them in a nearby bin. "I look forward to hearing from you." Jack grinned, and grabbing Bella's hand, they walked together to the ATV. Brahms was there waiting for them, wagging his tail at them like they'd been gone a week. As they climbed into the ATV, Jack turned to Bella and asked, "So what did you think of the silver mine?" Brahms jumped up and squatted between them. Jack scratched behind his ears. Brom's tongue hung out the side of his mouth, and he leaned in for more attention. Honestly, I found it big, dark, and a little scary, but I'm excited to see what the workers discover as they begin mining that area next week. Bella grinned as she slipped one arm around Brom's. Me too. We'll see if Grand had the right idea about mining deeper in the original site. Jack started the ATV and drove slowly along the open field. Where are we headed now? Bella's question could barely be heard above the wind blowing in Jack's ears. To the lake. He winked at her and began to drive down the old dirt road that led from the mine down the hill towards the 20 acres of lakefront property he had bought a few years ago. Jack stopped the ATV near the lake and turned off the engine. This is it. Oh, Jack, it's gorgeous here. Now I see what all the fuss has been about. Bella's eyes grew wide as her gaze swept the area. There were large poplar trees that ran along the edge of the land, and farther back were rolling hills. Trees separated the land from the sandy beach in front of the lake. There was a small cabin and a boathouse on the lakefront. Yes, it is quite nice. That's why I thought this would be the perfect place for the Rose Adventure Park. Jack stepped around to the back of the ATV. Looking around, he expelled a long breath. It is the perfect place, Jack. We just need to convince the town council. Bella realized she hadn't told Jack the latest news yet. Dad told me this morning that there was a town hall meeting last night about new bylaws they're putting in place. They also had a discussion about new businesses that would affect the town, like the Rose Adventure Park. Bella was still a little tense after hearing the news this morning. You were out of town on that new project, and I was locked in my office trying to finish this design. But Dad and Marmee went to the meeting. What did your dad have to say? Jack rubbed the back of his neck. It seems many people think your theme park is a good idea. Dad said there were some who made rude comments. One mother asked how a beast like Jack Stevenson could create a theme park and still expect parents or grandparents of young children to bring them anywhere near him. Bella frowned. How people can be rude like that is beyond me. A grimace formed around her lips. But some folks on the town council are undecided. Mayor Rainey is one of them, and so is the oldest person on the council, Mrs. Marple. Other members of the council love your idea. Of course, you already know that the Wolf brothers don't like your project and have convinced the newest council member, Mason Rogers, that your project is a bad idea, too. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. We'll need to somehow get the mayor and Mrs. Marple to see the benefits of having our own adventure park in Paradise Lake. Jack ran a hand through his hair as his gaze studied the 20 acres of land. That's what I thought, and that's why I suggested to Mayor Rainey that you would be the best person to give the speech at the Founders' Day celebration this year. That way you can talk about why you're so passionate about this adventure park. Bella, what were you thinking to tell the mayor I would speak in front of a crowd? Jack unconsciously touched his scar, something Bella noticed he did when he felt overwhelmed or stressed. Bella stepped closer to him. Jack, it'll be okay. It's only for 10 minutes. This is your chance to talk about your great-grandfather and the passion he had for Paradise Lake, and how that passion has carried over to you and your brothers. Folks will see that and be inspired to get on your side. Bella, I don't think this is a good idea. Jack looked away for a moment before turning back to her. She saw a haunted look in his eyes. It's been so long since I was really out in public. I mean, I think I've terrified enough people, don't you think? Jack, that's not what I see. As I look at you right now, I see a man who is successfully designing much-needed safety systems and also fun projects for others. I also see a man who loves his family and is dedicated to creating a place that will bring happiness to many children. Bella reached up and gently touched the scar on his right cheek. It doesn't matter about the scars, Jack. In fact, I think what you've gone through only makes what you have to say even more meaningful. Jack covered her hand with his. Her cheeks blossomed pink with his attention. His heart softened at Bella's words and dispelled some of his fears. Bella made him feel better than he'd ever felt before. Her belief in him, made Jack want to be all those wonderful things she thought he was. Her belief in him ignited a spark inside him to want to give that talk to the townsfolk, to let them see his side. Her belief in him made him want to let down the self-imposed walls, to let others see him for who he really was. Bella wasn't like his first wife, pretending to love him only to set him up for disappointment. Bella didn't care about the scar on his face. She only saw what could be, even though he'd been gruff and abrupt with her in the past few weeks. For a moment, Jack looked down at the soft hand that was enfolded in his, and fingers that entwined with his own. It was difficult to see where her hand ended and his began. Almost like the two of them together were meant to be. Bella followed his gaze and gently pulled her hand out of his. Her fingers twirled a silky strand of long brown hair, a sure sign she was feeling skittish. He noticed little quirks about her in the past few weeks, little signs that let him know when he'd gotten too close. A small smile formed around his mouth, dispersing some of the tension. "We'll convince the town council yet, Jack." Jack nodded, realizing that Bella had read his mind again. A grimace formed on his lips as he reached for the picnic basket. "Are you hungry?" "I'm famished." "Well then, let's go find a shady spot." Jack walked with Bella beyond the trees to the sandy beach. He spread out the picnic basket on a small hill that overlooked the blue lake. Bella opened the basket, pulling out sandwiches, veggies, fruit, and many types of pastries and squares. "It would seem that Mrs. Potter thinks she's feeding an army instead of just the two of us." Jack chuckled as he settled himself on the blanket. "The three of us, Jack. I found food for Brahms in the basket, too." Bella placed food in one dish and bottled water in another for Jack's dog. Bella laughed as Brahms began eating right away. She sank down onto the blanket. As they began to eat sandwiches, Jack enjoyed the heat of the sun, surprised at how at ease he felt with Bella today. His wife had been happy to go to the silver mine with him in spite of her fear of enclosed spaces. She continued to amaze him by how she willingly gave of herself to others. Bella had taken Elle with her to the Stevenson safe house earlier this week, and they had spent the afternoon with Danny, Bree, and the other girls there, not to mention all the hours she had already spent designing the Rose Adventure Park. Looking over at her, he noticed her tired eyes. The dark circles under Bella's eyes were telltale signs of too many late nights. "Didn't sleep much last night?" Bella looked up at him, her cheeks darkening to red. "Not so much." She reached into the picnic basket and grabbed a couple of bottles of water. She offered him a bottle before taking a long drink, studying him. "I saw your office light on when I went to grab a book from the library late last night." Jack moved closer to her, breathing deeply of her flowery scent. Taking this time to sit outside in the fresh air was a perfect way to spend the afternoon. What made it even better was being close to Bella. "Yeah, I've been working hard trying to refine the designs for the adventure park." Bella waved her arm as if to encircle the whole 20 acres. "I have just a few more tweaks, and then I'll show them to you to see if the new changes meet with your approval." With her grin, her brown eyes and pearly white smile sparkled, captivating him. "I can't wait to see it, Bella." He was caught under her enchantment and was sure he would approve almost anything she asked. "Your previous designs were real good. I'm interested to see how you could make them better." "Well, you'll just need to wait until I'm finished." "Speaking of being finished, did you get a chance to send the images to your friend who does the 3D design modeling?" Jack toyed with the water bottle in his hand as he looked at her. "Yes, she said we should expect to hear back from her either today or tomorrow." Jack sighed. "Good, because there's only 3 days left until the Founders' Day celebration. It'll be good to showcase the Rose Adventure Park alongside other businesses and events in the area." Jack sat up and looked across the lake to all the homes that were part of the Paradise Lake community. Bella studied Jack, following his gaze to see those folks who were boating on the lake and the homes that surrounded the lake. She turned to look at him. "You really love this area, don't you, Jack?" "I do. Grand inspired a dream of building a better community inside each of us boys as we were growing up. It must have caught on. Jack couldn't help but fondly remember his stalwart great-grandfather. I think that's one of the reasons why I hired workers to dig deeper into that mine. I don't want to have any regrets that I didn't try my best to find the treasure that Grand insisted was there. Bella smiled softly. I'm glad you're doing that, Jack. It's important to do what we can to try to find the treasure we're looking for, or else we'll always wonder what could have been. That sounds like a deep thought. Bella's cheeks turned pink and she looked away for a moment. Maybe, but it doesn't make it any less true. Jack grunted in response. Bella's voice sounded genuinely distressed. Do you still feel a loyalty and love for this town, in spite of how mean some folks have been to you, Jack? Jack paused for a second before he turned around and shrugged. Well, I really don't like it that the townspeople call me the Beast, or that mothers hurry the other way with their small children when they see me coming. Bella's mouth fell open slightly. You know what they call you? His deep laugh was sort of half-mocking. The Beast. Yes, I've known about that nickname for a long time. Shaking his head from side to side, he breathed out a tired sigh. I don't have any control over what people say about me. I understand their terror at seeing my hideous scars. Jack's gaze studied the small town of Paradise Lake, his shoulders taut like an overstressed string on a violin. Even though the accident was 4 years ago, he still tensed whenever he talked about it. Bella moved closer to him and put her small white hand on his arm. The skin on his arm tingled at the warmth of her touch. Jack, look at me, please. He turned his head slowly, his expression stoic, his eyes hooded. Just because you have a scar on one side of your face does not make you terrifying. You do not look hideous. A scar does not a monster or beast make, no matter what folks in town say. Bella moved her hand to the right side of his face and with gentle fingers touched his scar. You're still Jack Stevenson, successful businessman, kind-hearted son, generous brother, and compassionate supporter of the less fortunate. Nothing will ever change that. Their mean words and actions don't change who you are. Bella's soft words encircled him like a snug cocoon. Jack found himself drawn to her warmth. He tried so hard to stay away from her, to resist being tempted by his wife. He'd forced himself to stay away from her. He was constantly reminding himself that Bella was off limits. She was only his fake wife. What they had wasn't real. But, hearing her words, Jack's heart thawed a little bit more. It seemed his wife had discovered one of the secrets to melt a little more of that block of ice that encircled his heart. Jack reached his hand to cover hers. He lifted her small hand from his cheek and placed a soft kiss on the inside of her palm. How do you know just what I needed to hear? Jack peered over at her. Bella shrugged. I don't know. I just sense things, and then I feel like I need to speak the truth as a way of combating the lies you've heard from others. I'm glad I've got you in my corner, my beauty. Jack stared at his wife, unable to look away. Her eyes moved away from his and slipped down to focus on his lips. Quickly, she looked down at their clasped hands and tried to move away from him, to slip her hand out of his. Jack didn't know what came over him, but he couldn't let her move away. He needed to get closer. He needed to taste her sweet lips. Tugging on the hand he still held, he pulled her against his chest, slipping his arm around her waist. Brown eyes stared up at him in silent question, before Jack lowered his head and touched his lips to hers. His lips closed possessively over hers, searing her name on his heart. He pulled her onto his lap, kneading her close. Jack! Bella started to protest, but that lasted only for a moment before her body melted into his embrace. Jack wrapped his arms protectively around her, kissing her with a fiery tenderness, fitting and shaping her lips against his own. He explored the soft recesses of her mouth until she trembled. Consuming kisses followed, and Jack felt like he was on fire. Sensations that Bella awakened in him had been dormant far too long. He was afraid his heart was awakening to love and worried that he didn't know how to put a stop to it. Without warning, a loud splash shot through the silence, followed by a series of booming barks. Bella broke away from Jack's kisses to see Brahms running through the water's edge of the lake, chasing a much smaller dog. Close on his heels was a young boy running along the water's edge. "I think someone is trying to catch his dog." Bella pushed lightly against Jack's chest and stood to her feet, her legs shaky from their shared kisses. Jack pushed himself to stand to his feet, swooping down to give her one last kiss. "I'll be back, and I promise we'll finish this later." As he chased after his dog, all Jack could think of were his wife's sweet kisses. His wife was proving to be more passionate and captivating than he originally expected. All of a sudden his heart was tumbling over and over with a new yearning for more of Bella's affections. He didn't know how to stop these new desires from growing. Did he even want to?